April 28, 1945, Camp Lucky Strike, northern France. The mud was the color of old blood. Anneliese Voss felt it pulling at her worn boots as she stepped down from the canvas-covered truck, one hand pressed against her abdomen where the pain had been building for 3 days. Around her, 42 other women in stained Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms descended into the same French earth, their faces hollow, their eyes scanning for the violence they had been promised. Then the warmth came, blood running down her inner thigh, soaking through gray fabric, spreading dark against the mud-caked hem of her dress. 5 words left her lips before her legs folded. "I'm bleeding through my dress." She hit the ground hard. If you're watching this because you love untold stories from World War II that reveal the humanity, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Like this video if you believe history's most powerful lessons come from the smallest acts of mercy. The screaming began immediately. 19-year-old Trude Fassbinder dropped to her knees beside Anneliese's body, shrieking in German. Other women scattered backward, certain the massacre had started, certain the Americans would now reveal their true nature. Waltraud Kirchner grabbed 2 younger women and pulled them away, her face twisted with fury and terror. They had all been told the same thing during training, during the desperate retreat, during the 8-day transport westward. American soldiers are savages. They will violate you. Death is preferable to capture. Then 2 American medics sprinted across the yard. They wore white armbands marked with red crosses. Their boots threw up clods of mud. Their faces showed no rage, no cruelty, only urgent professional concern. Behind them came Captain Vernon Holly, a medical officer whose stethoscope bounced against his chest. As he ran, he dropped his clipboard without breaking stride. Within 90 seconds, he was kneeling in the mud beside Anneliese's unconscious body, his fingers pressed to her throat, checking for pulse, his uniform soaked through at the knees. He didn't seem to notice. The medic cut away fabric with scissors, exposing an infected shrapnel wound in her lower abdomen. Captain Holly looked up at Trude, still crouched over her friend like a shield. His German was broken, heavily accented, barely comprehensible, but the meaning cut through. "We help," he said, pointing to the red cross on his armband. "We help her." 3 minutes later, Anneliese was on a stretcher being loaded into an ambulance that roared into the camp with its siren wailing. The doors closed on clean medical equipment, oxygen tanks, supplies arranged on metal shelves. Nothing like the straw and bandages of German field hospitals. And in that moment, watching enemy medics fight to save one bleeding German woman, 42 prisoners realized everything they had been taught was wrong. Over 500,000 German women served as military auxiliaries during the Second World War. They were the Nachrichtenhelfer who operated radio equipment, the Stabschauffeurin who typed casualty lists and filed reports, the Flakwaffenfällen who tracked Allied bombers, the nurses who held dying boys and whispered lies about survival. By April 1945, they knew the Reich was finished. Berlin was surrounded. The Fuhrer had retreated to his bunker. The infrastructure was collapsing. But knowledge of defeat didn't erase years of indoctrination. Anneliese Voss had joined the Nachrichtenfeldern in 1942 at age 21. She was university-educated, fluent in French and English, raised in Cologne by parents who believed in duty and service. The recruiter promised meaningful work. Help your nation in its hour of need. She learned to operate radio equipment, decode messages, relay orders across static-filled channels. She believed she was serving something greater than herself. She believed Germany was righteous. Trude Fassbinder had no choice. At 17, her conscription notice arrived. Report to the Stabshelfer Inn Training Center in Munich. Learn to type 60 words per minute. Answer telephones. Count ammunition crates. She wanted to be a teacher. Instead, she became a clerk in a Wehrmacht supply office in Belgium, documenting retreat. Alfreda Linderman volunteered in 1940 when Germany seemed unstoppable. A trained nurse, she worked in field hospitals for 5 years, moving from France to Poland to the Eastern Front. She knew exactly what war was. She had held boys as they died, carrying memories no propaganda could erase. Propaganda was explicit and relentless. Posters showed brutish American G as towering over terrified German women. Newsreels showed looted churches. Radio broadcasts described torture camps. Instructors warned, if captured by Americans, they will rape and kill you. They hide it better. They are hypocrites committing atrocities. Better to die fighting than surrender. That doctrine was drilled into every woman in uniform. When American armored columns cut off their signals company during retreat in northern France, 43 women stood in a farmyard with hands raised, expecting death. A young lieutenant announced they were prisoners of war. The words meant nothing. They believed cruelty would come later. During the 8-day journey westward, they traveled in covered trucks, given water and hard biscuits. They were guarded but untouched. No threats came. This deepened fear. At night they whispered. Waltraud insisted they should resist dishonor. Sieglinde Bachmann doubted everything. She had connected calls between officers promising victories that became retreats. Alfreda said little. Trude prayed silently, clutching a wooden cross. When Anneliese collapsed, American medics ran toward her with medical bags instead of rifles. Everything cracked in that moment. The processing tent smelled of disinfectant and canvas. Signs appeared in German and English. Registration, medical examination, supplies. An American woman with a Red Cross armband asked questions through a translator. No one was struck or insulted. It was paperwork, methodical, normal beyond expectation. Medical examinations followed. Behind canvas partitions were American female nurses. Privacy curtains, cotton robes, individual stalls. Trude went first. Lice were noted without disgust. Delousing and clean clothes were promised. In the showers, hot water poured endlessly. Lavender soap filled the air. Trude cried, finally human again. That evening they entered the mess hall. The smell of real cooking meat stopped Trude cold. Inside, food was served without comment. Rice, vegetables, pork, bread, butter, milk, and an orange. Sieglinde stared at the fruit. Fresh fruit had vanished years earlier. They sat together, silent, unable to eat. Waltraud spoke first, her voice low and bitter. It's a trick. They're showing us abundance to break our spirits. Even as she said it, her eyes stayed on the meat. Alfreda picked up her fork. As a nurse, she was practical. Starving herself to prove a point was idiocy. She cut a small piece of meat and placed it in her mouth, chewing slowly with eyes closed. It was real. Properly cooked, properly seasoned pork. A single tear rolled down her cheek. That was all the permission the others needed. They began to eat, slowly at first, then faster as bodies remembered real food. Some cried while eating. Others ate in focused silence. Trude managed 3 bites of rice before stopping, her shrunken stomach unable to take more. The bread was hardest to accept. Sieglinde held the slice with both hands, feeling its softness. This white bread hadn't existed since before the war. Across the table, a woman whispered, "How can they have so much?" We were told America was collapsing. She gestured at her half-eaten meal, more food than she had seen in weeks. This isn't weakness. This is power. The observation settled heavily over the table. Everything they had been told about America was dismantled with every bite. Germany was starving in ruins, while America had enough food to feed enemy prisoners like this. The propaganda promised discipline would overcome softness. But discipline had brought hunger. Softness had brought abundance. The orange became a symbol. Trude held hers, the color almost painful in a gray world. She inhaled the citrus scent before peeling it. Juice ran over her fingers. The sweetness was overwhelming after years of bland food. Tears streamed down her face as she ate slowly. A young American soldier noticed. He caught Trude's eye and gave a small, awkward nod. Not mocking, not cruel, just acknowledgment. She looked away, ashamed of her tears, her hunger, and that the enemy had given her an orange she devoured with gratitude. That night they lay in real beds with real blankets. Waltraud spoke into the darkness. They feed us, so we'll forget. Elfrida replied quietly. Or they're just following their rules. The Geneva Convention requires proper food. Maybe this is simply what they do. 2 weeks later, Anneliese returned from the hospital transformed, color in her cheeks, weight returning. Her wound properly healed. They gave me penicillin, she said. Real penicillin. They explained everything, asked permission. She paused. They saved my life. No one had an answer that fit the old beliefs. Small kindnesses accumulated like snow. Corporal Chester Kowalski, a young guard from Chicago, tried to learn German phrases. His pronunciation was terrible, but the women appreciated the effort. When Trude tripped and scraped her knee, he helped immediately, radioing for medical help, visibly worried. You okay? Hurt bad? Small hurt? The exchange was tiny, almost meaningless, but it represented basic human connection across enemy lines, concern without cruelty, help without expectation. It unsettled them more than threats ever could, because it contradicted everything they had been taught to believe. Work assignments were light. Kitchen help, laundry, some assisted in the infirmary. But what shocked them most wasn't the work. It was the payment. On the third day, each woman received camp scrip, roughly $2 per week. They were being paid for labor. Siglin stared at the bills. This makes no sense. We're prisoners. Why would they pay us? The translator explained patiently. Geneva Convention, Article 62. Prisoners of war shall be paid for their work. It's the law. The law, as if law still mattered. The canteen was another revelation. Prisoners could buy cigarettes, writing paper, stamps, soap, chocolate, magazines. On her 4th day, Siglin bought a chocolate bar, spending half her week's earnings. She ate it slowly that evening, letting it melt on her tongue after years of nothing. Trude bought writing paper and a stamp. Letters were allowed, though censored. She wrote carefully to her mother. I am alive. I am in France in an American camp. I am being treated according to international law. She did not mention the showers, soap, or food. Those truths were too complicated. How could she explain she lived better as a prisoner than her mother likely did as a free woman in ruined Germany? That reality felt disloyal, dangerous, impossible to put into words without shattering everything she had once believed. At night, the women whispered. I believed in the Fuhrer, one confessed. I believed we were saving Europe. She hesitated. If we were right, why are we starving in ruins while the enemy gives oranges to prisoners? The question lingered unanswered. Waltraud resisted. They're trying to break us, make us forget loyalty. But her voice lacked conviction. She had eaten the food, used the soap, slept in a clean bed. Even she could not escape the contradiction pressing in from all sides. Elfrida spoke carefully. I think we were lied to, not just by the government, but by ourselves. We wanted to believe Germany was special, destined for greatness. The words settled heavily, fragile and irreversible, but the truth is simpler. We were people caught in a war started by leaders who valued power over humanity. The cracks in their ideology widened daily. Each small mercy, each act of basic decency, each moment of unexpected humanity chipped away at the certainty they had carried. The Reich had taught them that Americans were monsters. But monsters didn't pay prisoners' wages. Monsters didn't provide libraries. Monsters didn't ask permission before surgery. One afternoon, Annalise requested a meeting with the camp commander, Colonel Harlan Presley. With Alfreda and Trude accompanying her, she entered his office. Colonel Presley was a quiet man in his 50s with tired eyes. He invited them to sit. Annalise spoke in careful English, words she had been practicing for weeks. "Colonel, I want to thank you. When I collapsed, I believed I was dying. I believed Americans would let me die or kill me. I was wrong. You saved my life. You gave me medicine, surgery, care. You treated me like a human being when I expected to be treated like an animal." She paused, gathering herself. "We were taught to hate you. We were taught you were evil. But you showed us kindness when you could have shown cruelty. You gave us dignity when you could have taken it. You changed how I see the world. That is a gift I didn't expect and don't deserve, but I will carry it for the rest of my life." The colonel was quiet, then he spoke gently. "Miss Voss, we did what any civilized nation should do. We followed the Geneva Convention because it represents the best of human behavior during the worst times. War is terrible, but it doesn't have to destroy our humanity. I'm glad you recovered, and I hope when you return to Germany, you'll remember that even enemies can choose mercy." In that moment, the distance between prisoner and captor disappeared. They were simply two people acknowledging shared humanity. In December 1945, the announcement arrived. Repatriation would begin in January. Ships would take them home to Germany. The news should have brought joy. Instead, it brought dread. Trude lay in her bunk that night, listening to rain drum on the roof, realizing she was afraid to go home. Not afraid of the journey, afraid of what she would find. Afraid of her mother's eyes looking at her healthy face. Afraid of neighbors asking what captivity had been like. Afraid to admit she had lived better as a prisoner than they had lived free. Germany in 1946 was unrecognizable. When their ship docked in Hamburg, Trude saw a landscape of rubble. Cities that once buzzed with life were fields of destruction. People moved like ghosts, thin, hollow-eyed, wearing whatever they could find. Children begged. Old women sold possessions for bread. Trude found her mother living in a shelter built from scavenged wood. When they embraced, Trude felt her mother's bones through thin clothing, but her mother didn't accuse. She simply held her daughter and wept with relief. Later, when Trude tried to explain the camp, her mother listened without judgment. "You survived," she said finally. "That's what matters. Now you can help us rebuild." Over the following years, that's exactly what they did. Trude used her English to work with American occupation forces, translating documents, building bridges. She saw the same contradiction. The nation that had bombed Germany now helped rebuild schools and hospitals. Annalise became a teacher, educating German students about international law and human rights. Alfreda returned to nursing, working alongside American military doctors, learning new techniques, sharing knowledge. Sigmund married, had children, told them stories about the war. Not the propaganda version, the truth. The soap that smelled like lavender, the orange she tasted. The American nurse who held a patient's hand. The colonel who spoke of mercy as choice. What did it teach you? Her daughter asked years later. Sigmund thought carefully. It taught me that people are more complicated than we want them to be, that enemies can show kindness, that nations can be brutal and merciful both, that the world doesn't fit simple stories. It taught me that surviving isn't just staying alive, it's staying human, and mercy is harder to carry than hatred, but it's the only thing that lasts. They had entered captivity as believers in the Reich. They left as students of a different truth, that humanity persists even in war's darkest hours, and that choice matters more than ideology. The story of these 43 German women is one thread in a larger tapestry. Thousands of Axis prisoners experienced similar awakenings in Allied camps during World War II. Each story matters because each represents a human being confronting the gap between propaganda and reality, between hatred and understanding. As Annalise told her grandchildren before she died in 2001, the Americans didn't break us with cruelty. They broke us with kindness, and that breaking hurt more than torture could have because it forced us to see them as human. Once you see your enemy as human, you can never hate the same way again. That's the lesson. That's why the soap mattered more than the bombs. The greatest weapon wasn't military might. It was the choice to treat enemies with dignity. That choice echoed across generations, proving that even in war, mercy can be more powerful than vengeance. These stories must be told because they remind us that humanity is always a choice, and that choice defines us more than any victory or defeat ever could.